We've been about this work: diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, shared through the voices of a white woman and a black man. We bring lived experiences. We have pursued D&I progress for most of our professional lives. We use Crazy and the King to cover news, tips from colleagues, and host incredible guests. Listeners, count on Julie and I to transparently drive the conversation. We thank you for rocking with us. Check it. Julie, kick off the show.
Welcome to Crazy and the King.
So it's Thursday, and I know everyone this entire week has talked about the Super Bowl and all of the money spent on commercials and all that great stuff, but I can assure you we won't be talking about the Super Bowl here. I know how much you love football, but
I do.
Yeah, we're not talking about Super Bowl today.
It's okay.
We also won't talk about still how angry I am about January 6th. We're not going to talk about that today. We won't talk about the fact that I had on a midriff last week. Even though the weather is a whole lot better, it's so much warmer here in Baltimore. But what we will talk about, we'll talk about last week, the Secretary of Agriculture, he jumped in and actually, you know what? Before we do that, did you see the story around the administration allocating the funds for
Afghanistan?
Nope, not Afghanistan.
Okay.
People using methamphetamines.
Oh, God. Yes.
Did you see that?
Yes, and the big hubbub about how supposedly the U.S. government was buying people crack pipes. Like, come on, guys.
You know what I was mad about? What I was mad about is them using the word equity in that scenario.
Yeah.
And here's what really it frustrated me around messaging, because so many people focused on the fact that the administration said they were trying to provide equity. They were trying to make it so that drug usage could be safe in Black and brown communities. But they used the word equity, and we know what that word equity means. They didn't talk about drug usage in white communities.
Well, and then
it really frustrated me.
Yeah. Well, and on top of it, the way that the U.S. government and lawmakers and people in power have created drug legislation to make drug usage punishments much higher in people of color, right? Crack versus, powder cocaine, all of that historical stuff. And then to come out and say, well, now we're trying to create, it's bullshit. It was poorly messaged and probably poorly thought out.
Yeah, because I said to myself, I didn't see anything in there that said, while we may be giving these centers, these places, funds to help get equipment, so we'll also make sure we provide beds, we provide educational training, we provide facilities and resources to help pull people off of drugs. I didn't hear or read any of that. And I said, we totally missed the mark. But I will tell you this. There was an administration, or there was an organization in the administration that used the word equity the right way. And that was Secretary of Agriculture, Mr. Tom Vilsack. He actually appointed a 15-member equity commission in response to the Biden-Harris administration's pursuit of a more comprehensive approach to advancing equity for all in the agricultural ecosystem. That's a whole lot of words to just say farming. You know what I'm saying? Yes. They're trying to put this commission together to study the inequities that have persisted in the farming space, and they're now trying to change some of that. And I thought that was a beautiful announcement last week.
Yeah, and like the conversation we had around mining, again, just a place where we don't have a lot of equity and historical injustices types of conversations in our everyday life or in our DEI world. TikTok is getting
real quick, before we do that, I want to give a shout out, though. My dear friend, Mr. Todd Corley, he is on that equity panel. So for the next 2 years, he gets to work side by side with some incredible people. And for those of you out there listening, real quick, if you are not familiar with the name Sherry Sherrod, I think it's Sherry Sherrod. I'm almost positive. And if I mess it up, just Google the Equity Commission from the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. I want you to look at what happened to her years ago and why it's so incredibly rewarding and important that her voice is also a part of this 15-member committee. Shout out to you, Mr. Todd Corley. Go ahead, Jay.
Congratulations. So there's a new Glassdoor. And if you don't know what Glassdoor is, it's an employee review site or an employer review site left by employees and former employees. Huge deal in our HRTA world. But this one is called Clara. And it's basically Glassdoor for content creators. So influencers, people who get paid for sponsored content, all of those kind of things. So Clara is basically going to give pay transparency for those creators. So if I make a TikTok, if I make an Instagram reel, whatever it is, I can go on and see what TikTok is paying, what YouTube is paying, what any other random sponsor, I guess, is paying for that content. And just like with pay transparency around gender, this is really going to create some opportunities for individuals of color who are not getting paid the same level as white creators to know who they want to work for and how to better negotiate their influencer contracts.
Yeah, it was started by 31-year-old Nino, or I think it's Nino de Guzman. She actually was employed by TikTok, left the organization, started the company, and I'm sure she probably was like, look, wait a minute, I got all of this insight. I have the access to the data. I've seen the trends. I've seen what's happening. I've seen the furor that's happening on social media with Black content creators being wildly upset. And I think I'm going to ask our guest about that later on in the show, how he feels around content creation, valuation, and TikTok and social media. So anyway, if you are out there on TikTok, I am not, but if you are on TikTok, you can go to Clara, 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 and perhaps be able to get a bit of insight around dollar bills.
Yeah. And just kind of wrapping up transparency and stakeholder capitalism, as we've been talking about over the last few weeks. So, Edelman Trust Report, and we've talked about how important our CEO is in terms of trust and who we trust and the information that we trust, and still a lot of commitments, right? About equity, about bridging the pay gap, about closing some of our income disparities in this country. But, right, what's really happening?
But out of 116 takeovers of companies worth more than $1 billion since April of 2020, not one, zero, not one included anything legally binding that would protect jobs or guaranteed compensation for those who would be laid off. So we have 116. None of these takeovers were, well, let me not say that because I don't know that to be the case. Whether those takeovers were agreed to or hostile, let me say that 116 of them, zero, took care of protecting the people who were going to lose jobs. Zero. And in the story, it's over on the Wall Street Journal on the story, and there's a bunch of other stats inside on the left side of the story. But in that story, it also talks about, there was a phrase in there that said, the bottom line is these CEOs no longer have a responsibility. Once I've gotten rid of the organization, I've shuttered it, private equity firm or whomever has come in and swooped it up, another competitor, we done. We don't care. And so it's really frustrating. But what we have to do is make sure that we continue to hold them accountable. And so it also says in the story, we have to band together and use the strength of our voices, our collective voices. It can't just be one or two people saying, hey, you're not doing the right thing. It has to be sort of a chorus and a movement of individuals to make sure we hold them accountable.
Yeah. And on that note, I'd like to call out the CEO of Starbucks, who is fighting unions, raising prices, blaming it on higher wages, but got himself this week a $20 million comp payout. And same thing that we see with Amazon, who is raising their prices for Prime an additional year, fighting unionization all over the country. And Jeff is going to pay to get a bridge rebuilt in Rotterdam so his yacht can get through.
And in a flash, last week, the Senate made headway on a bill that would forbid clauses in employment contracts requiring workers to litigate sexual harassment. So we give them a hand clap. They made me drink until I was blackout drunk, said Nikki Broderick. She tells Fortune in reference to her days at Activision. I don't even know how I got back to my hotel at night. Sharing the story about Activision Workplace again back in 2011. Peloton is getting the digital work, and I'm still trying to figure out why people do TikTok. Panda, panda, panda. I love that one. And apparently COVID required folks to appreciate their own kitchens, and now some are demanding redesigns while others are looking for a good Bordeaux. Goodell wasn't happy, and Spotify is dropping $100 million behind the voices of the marginalized. No matter how you feel right now, Jay and I will be right back. The path to a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce requires a partner who understands the journey as much as the destination.
Our friends at JobBite understand both, and their unique combination of technology and services stand ready to help your organization achieve your DE&I goals.
Which is why we partner with them. You can visit them at jobbite.com/CATK. Again, that's jobbite.com/CATK to learn more about how JobBite can help you mitigate conscious and unconscious bias, create opportunities for underrepresented communities, and build strong teams with incredible talent.
JobBite, recruit with purpose, hire with confidence. All right, so I am excited because we are welcoming an amazing guest that we have waited a long time to get on the show and are so happy to be able to introduce you all to.
How long did we wait? How long? Tell the folks how long we waited.
I mean, it's been at least 4 or 5 months, I think. Like the man
it was in let me
demand.
Tell you, yeah, in demand. You know, you got to just accept your rotation, how that rotation comes. You know, and then of course we got to be fair. Holidays crept in, and we had to give some respect for the holidays and all of that. But I'm absolutely excited. Why don't you introduce our guest?
So André Blackman is the founder and CEO of Onboard Health, a specialized executive search and advisory firm focused on creating a more inclusive future of health. He's a pioneering strategist with deep ties across the healthcare innovation, startup, and digital strategy landscapes. While the pandemic forced many to reckon with, right, what we know, the existence of systemic racism in healthcare, some for the first time, Blackman has dedicated his life to closing representation gaps in medicine. You can follow him on Twitter at MindOfAndre, ANDRE. Check it out.
So my entire career has been around public health, the social determinants of health and healthcare. And after spending probably around, 13, 14, 15 years squarely in the innovation space and digital health and things of that nature, the startup space as it relates to the healthcare industry, but also seeing this intersection a few years ago around things like the social determinants, public health, meeting traditional medicine and healthcare at the innovation space. I really was just inspired by all the amazing people that I've met throughout my career who want to build the future of health with all sorts of different skill sets, right? So data science or UX, UI, human-centered design, engineering, communications. And I felt like there was an opportunity here, especially as we saw the convergence to build a more sustainable and equitable future of health, to really kind of look at the workforce.
Welcome, man. How you feeling?
Doing great, everyone. Happy February, happy Black History Month, happy
Yeah, yeah.
2022, all that kind of good stuff. Julie, thank you so much for that intro. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling really good.
Good. Well, we're happy to hear you. Happy to have you here. So, as you said in that clip we just heard, you're not new to this world. You've been at it for a while. You launched a company back in 2007. So let's start there and tell us a little bit about that, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely. So I started actually writing the Pulse and Signal blog in 2007, and this is when back in the day, if you had a blog, you were kind of an instant rock star, right? Like you had something to say, you knew how to put together a platform, and that was how things got started. I mean, that was my background, a mix of engineering, communication, and public health. Still very interested in how technology and innovation was going to move that forward. But also 2007 was when Twitter came out, right? A lot of the social media aspect was moving forward, and I wanted to see how the intersection of health and digital kind of was moving together. And so the Pulse and Signal blog really got started in giving myself a platform to talk about these things. But naturally, I'm a people person, and I love getting into the minds of others who are just doing amazing things. And Pulse and Signal, the blog became known for my interviews with people literally around the world who were into things like behavior change, social marketing. So basically, wearing a bicycle helmet, that's social marketing, right? How do you do healthy behavior change through like media and things of that nature too? And that's what really just kind of catapulted me into doing on-site interviews at conferences, right? The Health 2.0 conference was getting started, and this whole kind of patient-driven revolution, technology and healthcare. I was deep in it. And but I also was really excited about highlighting the voices and the people who are making big changes in this industry. And that's what really kind of led to Pulse and Signal as a digital strategy agency for a lot of these startups and the organizations in healthcare and in public health and in social impact, really understanding how to message, how to engage, and things of that nature too. And that was a big part of those early days for sure.
So the early days are always great for setting the foundation, and I love the fact that you said on-site interviews, like literally in the moment when you were at a conference, you would basically put what an Android device, an iPhone in front of an individual. How would you conduct some of those interviews?
Torin, I mean, for those of you who might remember, and I still have it, the flip video cameras were really hot, right? Back in the day, you had a handheld, video recording device, and that's what I did. I went to conferences, had my flip video camera, and just kind of had questions prepared, and kind of created video components. Some of that was also by text, right? So I might have been on site and just kind of jotting down notes from individuals and then turning that into a text-based interview. But I love being there with people because there's no substitute, right, for body language and eye contact and really feeling the individual and how they're feeling about what they're building and doing. So yeah, those are fun times.
Appreciate that. And again, that's the foundation. So today at Onboard Health, for you, it's more than, looking at D&I through a product or a service lens. It's really about life and people like you and the team. You take this extremely serious. And one of the reasons why I'm extremely excited about you being here is because of that report. And I reference it often, that Citibank report from September of 2020 that talks about racism and what it has cost the United States. And it listed healthcare as one of those cylinders. It was four of them, healthcare being one of the cylinders that we have done a dismal job of paying attention to. When you use the example, though, you use the example of the work that you do, connecting the dots, data scientists and, looking at food deserts and food insecurity. Why is it that important for you and more than just a product or a service?
I love that. I mean, even taking it back to like why it went down to this pathway, right? Like just being in the space for the last 15, 16, 17 years, right? And seeing the changes and the shifts, right? To be completely honest, medicine in this country was really focused on acute care, right? You were sick, you got help, right? Over the past several years, however, though, the social determinants of health really kind of crept in to create this kind of perfect storm, right, of opportunities, right? So the social determinants really how we live, how we work, how we play, how our cities are built, right? Food sustainability, how we get access to healthy food, right? and all that kind of weaves together with chronic disease and things of that nature. And so why this is so important is that there's a historical aspect to healthcare and medicine in this country, right? Oftentimes, exclusion was actually at the root of a lot of these things. Who could get access to high quality care, right? And looking at things like redlining, right? Literally in the United States, right? The historical aspect of literally creating geographic exclusion based off of where people are living in the communities, right? That really kind of changed the game, right? Literally kind of looking at how hospitals, and this happens in education and things of that nature too, and we're seeing that now, but especially like in medicine and healthcare, who has access to these things? How do we get to our appointments? All those kind of things are still at the root of where we're at today, right? And I tell a lot of people, especially when I talk about innovation and technology, like we can't innovate on top of a hot mess, right? Like we cannot forget what happened, right? And a lot of times when we're talking about, especially the pandemic, the Tuskegee experiment pops up a lot, right? The amount of mistrust and distrust, misinformation that happened years ago, right? For Black communities in particular, right? And so that's a big part of it, right? Is like looking at the historical aspect, but also now we're seeing all these kind of different aspects of how, where zip codes, predetermine your life expectancy, right? Looking at, if you're living in a certain building, right? How asthma increases in certain buildings because of asbestos, or because there's a high percentage of things like, cockroaches and things of that nature too, right? Irritants. These are all aspects of this total package and this total view of what health looks like. And that's exactly why we're focused on those kind of things, because leadership creates the policies, right? They create the products and the services that eventually need to help the communities that they're supposed to be serving. And if representation is not there, if lived experiences are not there, then naturally the services and the products and even the concepts, the ideas are going to fall flat. And so that's why we're really passionate about representation, particularly in leadership in a lot of these organizations, especially a lot of these companies now that are coming with the resources that are tackling with tech and using mental health and all these kind of things. If the leadership team is not representative, then what do you think is going to happen as far as the results for the services and products? So that's why we're really passionate about this.
Julie, before you hit Andre, when he said the Tuskegee experiment and how that comes up often, I think his name is James Marion, considered to be the father of gynecology, and how he was performing. He was just performing different acts on enslaved women, no medicine whatsoever, just like going in and ripping these women apart. It's the history of how medicine has been performed, been deployed, been accessible, like Andre said, is extremely problematic. And so I'm glad that you're here. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, well, and I just to tackle on that too, is I think, and I've said this before, so many of us in the white community are ignorant to those things. And I don't think that I'll speak for myself. It's not a lack of care. It's a lack of knowledge a lot of times. So telling those stories, like when we talked about Bruce's Beach and those historical inequities, I had so many people reach out to me and say, I had no idea that this happened. And that's just a really important forum that we have to keep talking about things that we know, because the vast majority of us, of white America, the white world, doesn't know about that historical savagery, right?
And many in the Black community. Let's be very fair. Many in the Black community. I mean, again, I grew up in Davenport, Iowa. I've learned more in the last 15 years, maybe 20, that I learned, in the first 30 years of my life. And so it really is, and it's not always nefarious and, with animus. You just don't know what you don't know unless it's placed in front of you. So, yeah, so I would say it's not just the white community. This education is something that should be happening in all communities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're fighting that fight every day. Andre, if you have listened to the show or you know anything about me, I have mental health disabilities, chronic, multiple, that I'll live with for the rest of my life. And I know that I've been fighting the conversation in corporate America, in my personal life, that like hey, mental health is a real thing. We need mental health parity in our insurance. We need it in the way that physicians are treating people. And the pandemic is obviously created a place where we're able to have a conversation about mental health that we've never been able to have before. How is Onboard Health kind of addressing or starting to talk about mental health?
Yeah, absolutely, Julian, and thank you so much. I mean, I first and foremost, I just want to call out like the vulnerability aspect of you letting people know about these things, right? I mean, that in itself, I think, creates the narrative, right? Like it's okay to talk about these things, and now it's time for us to like, what's next, right? Solutions. So to your point, this is a big part of our landscape right now, especially in the healthcare innovation landscape. Mental and behavioral healthcare is skyrocketing, right? Looking at things like digital therapeutics, right? We're working with clients now who are focused on these kind of aspects, in the marketplace, but also supplying these kind of solutions for employers. So internally, right, as we're having conversations with employers about creating equitable and inclusive workspaces, right? This is something that's coming up time and time again, right? When we're thinking about things like, are we going back to work? Do people want to actually go back into the workplace, right? Or even, working remotely, right? One of the things that pops up is, backgrounds, like, you're in people's homes now, right? And even that was coming up as far as the biases and the microaggressions, like, oh, what's that kind of, is that a shrine? Is that, those kind of different things that came up like in the actual workplace. These are the things that we help our clients with and our partners with around like, okay, talent is one thing, right? Like we need more quote unquote diverse talent. Well, first and foremost, right? Like as we all have heard, like, a lot of this starts at home first, right? Like let's actually look at our brand. Like how are we showing up for people? Like what's actually happening internally that we have people are like, scrambling, especially after the George Floyd murder. Okay, we need our boards to look like this. We need to do that. But like, hold up. We didn't even actually like look at ourselves to figure out what's going on. So the two pathways in which we've been really interacting at Onboard Health in these conversations is like, okay, what actually has been done to create safe environments now for your employees, for your team, for your leadership, right? Because we're not sending people into places that haven't even thought about this, right? So that's one piece. But then also for the work in our space, right? Mental health is really hot right now, and it for good reason, as we talked about. So a lot of our partners in our ecosystem, a lot of the founders as well, like even in the startup space, this is becoming a big thing, right? There's actual startups now where lived experiences, right? Like we talked about, cultural competency and how there's a new wave of Black and brown founders underestimated, as Arlen Hamilton from Backstage Capital calls it. People are saying, you know what? I don't see things that help me, right, as a Black woman. So I need to either find that if I don't find the trust already, or I'm going to create it. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the maternal health space. You have Melissa Hanna over at Mommy. You have Poppy Seed Health, right? These are like, really kind of focusing on community focused solutions to things like mental health, right? Eric over at Ayana Therapy, same kind of thing. Ashley Wisdom at Health in Her Hue, creating a platform for Black women to get access to understand, culturally competent care. So that's what we're seeing, in this space. That's how we're supporting. We're building those teams that have that kind of vision in place to create a more equitable future of health. And that's what we're really excited about as well. I remember working on a campaign that targeted 18 to 24-year-old African Americans, making sure that you're talking to your partner about your sexual status, right? So really looking at, HIV, AIDS, STD prevention, that sort of thing. And, oftentimes these campaigns would have, I think, the experts like huddled in a room together, kind of thinking through all the demographic and the data and all the reports that have been made. And then they kind of create the campaign and then kind of like issue it out to the people without actually co-creating it.
So I'm actually going to take I'm going to take that comment around it being important, the safe space, the cultural competency, assessing the brand, doing that internal diagnostic. I'm going to take that. But as you heard in this clip, oftentimes voices of Black and brown people, marginalized communities, they continue to be suppressed. They continue to be ignored. They continue to be minimized, put to the side. They sometimes are even hijacked. Like the idea can come from them, it's shuttered, and then it resurfaces through the voice of a white colleague, a male colleague, in some instances, an able-bodied colleague in some instances. How do we get over this? Or is there a way to get over this? How do we help ourselves to not have to keep fighting that fight of being seen?
Yeah, that's a great question, Torin. I mean, at the root of it is, that whole colonization piece, right? I mean, like, oh, this is great, so we're going to co-opt this and turn this to something that we're comfortable with. Usually, that happens in white leadership and culture because there's that aspect about being comfortable. We don't want to be thrown off a little bit, right? And especially at the beginnings of like me writing on Pulse and Signal and things of that nature too, I wrote something called the Sustain or Die Manifesto, right? This is back in, I think, like 2012, talking about the absolute critical need to have co-created solutions, right? We're not, the top-down approach has not been working anymore, especially in health, right? And so, that's a big part of like what we're seeing right now, especially with companies like City Block Health, right? That's actually layering in technology and digital solutions and innovation into a community kind of focused solution around access to healthcare and things of that nature too. Really working with community leaders to create those solutions that we need. And so this is a big kind of part of like why my vision for Onboard Health is around leadership, because if we have the people in leadership that are creating these decisions that know like we need to look at something from a different angle, that's how we kind of continue lifting up these voices, right? That's how we make those decisions in partnership with community, with the people that are coming up with these ideas. So like from a corporate culture perspective and companies, this is why we're creating this to say like, okay, there's talent. It's never a pipeline issue, but also there's a ripple effect when we have the right people in place, right? And so that's, I think, is a key part of it. The other part that I'm really excited about is the entrepreneurship angle to where we are like in digital health right now and things of that nature. Like I said, there's a lot of first-time founders that are more, representative of our society and our communities that are standing up and saying like, hey, I need to build this, right? Andrew from Live Chair Health, right? Start out as kind of a barbershop focused health, engagement piece to really kind of elevate literacy and things of that nature. And now, he's just doing amazing things with the company, right? And so now there's that ownership piece to our industry right now, right? Before, you'd have like these big magnates in healthcare, but now we're starting to see companies that are saying, you know what, like we're actually going to take this because this is what we know, right? And then there's a more equitable process to say like, okay, this large companies has seen the value of this startup and what they're doing, but we're not just kind of taking the IP. Like there's actually an exchange of resources, right? Like, and then that's how we create the sustainable, equitable system. So that's how we are personally kind of seeing how we're elevating representation that's recognized, because we're in a capitalistic society. So if we're talking about exchanges of resources, building businesses and things of that nature that actually address these issues, that's how we're going to see a lot of these shifts happen.
Oh, I love that you've given us 6, 7, 8 names that I'm going to go back and research and go, okay, these are founders that we need to talk to, that we need to support, businesses that I want to learn more about. So thank you for that. So let's kind of a silly question. Let's kind of lighten it up a little bit. And talk about the emerging cannabis space. I think this is also, at least in my house, a hot topic. I think everywhere a hot topic. And, from a healthcare perspective or just your perspective, what's really surprised you regarding this space over the last few years?
Yes. Oh,
why are you smiling, man? Why are you smiling? Why are you?
So many thoughts.
Okay.
I mean, the first thing that pops up into my head is the social justice aspect of it all, right? I mean, there's so many examples of just like off the wire, like startup ideas that have come up that are based off of, the backs of immigrants and like cultural aspects of our country, right? I remember there was a startup that was like trying to get some sort of amount of money, millions of dollars, to create a new kind of bodega style kind of like vending machine kind of stuff, like co-opting like even the term bodega without like, once again, representation not on that team whatsoever, right? And so thinking about like the cannabis space, this has been something that for a long time, right? I'm an 80s baby, so looking at like the drug, like the war on drugs and things of that nature too, but really kind of criminalizing a lot of different things like over the past few decades, right? A lot of people have felony records and things of that nature that have completely derailed their entire lives. And now you have like the 20 something hoodie wearing, entrepreneur that is, like selling, CBD popsicles. And it's like, hey, we need to have this $50 million like investment on it. And now it's cool, right? But if you look once again at the demographics of the people that have been leading, that industry, right, and that resurgence, right, they don't reflect the people that have got incarcerated and are still paying for it, right? Like this is what I get really like passionate about, right? A lot of people don't understand that one like aspect of somebody's life can derail the entire thing, and it's so hard to get back on track, right? Because we're taught certain ways in which our lives need to go in order to be successful, right? That whole but then there's a dichotomy in the American culture around pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Oh, I'm sorry, we actually completely eradicated ownership of entire generations of people in your community. But hey, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. This is America. You can get it done, right? So I'm going off on a kind of a. I'm sorry, Julie. This is not light
No,
at
it's
all.
perfect.
So,
it's perfect. Keep going.
But yeah, but like this is what I'm talking about here, right? A lot of people are like, I don't understand. Like, why is it so much? Why is it so hard, right? You're complaining or yada yada yada, right? But not too long ago, like grandfathers, right? Couldn't actually save money, right? You would try to go to the bank. It's like, no, I'm sorry, we don't service you. Meanwhile, like somebody, on the other side of Chicago, there's a trust fund even before they're born, that they can go into like economic, like, confidence. You know what I'm saying? And so these are all the different things about why I'm frustrated, tying it back to like capitalism, right? We're making money now off something that was so demonized, but not even just demonized, but it was tied to certain communities in such a derogatory way that literally they're getting incarcerated for years, right? And so we're seeing all these kind of things, right? The Central Park Five, and the narratives are still there. It's still there. And so I did my senior thesis paper in college on menthol cigarettes in the African American community. A lot of people don't realize, with the Great Migration, that you had a lot of like individuals, like brands like Cool, actually start, and we saw this once again not too long ago, menthol cigarettes being marketed to women as a way to lose weight, to stay thin, but also for communities of color, right? And guess what? To this day, the Cool brand is synonymous with the Black community. It's not by accident. So that's just kind of like some tangents as far as the cannabis industry, and like this is a part of public health. It impacts people's lives, and generations have to work to get back on track. So,
and my good I call them the Three Kings, but my dear friends down in Miami, they run a company called Protist Global. It's an executive search firm, and they actually have a podcast called Plant Profits. So for those of you out there that are, trying to learn about the space, they interview individuals coming from that cannabis industry, and they cover a variety of different topics. And I love listening to, what they are sharing. And you're absolutely right, man. It's something that we should absolutely be keeping our eye on. I'm going to end the show with a quote that I saw of yours, André. The quote goes, while tackling fires, writing emails, and providing customer or client results are sometimes necessary, having time for yourself to process and look ahead is essential. You stress being relentless with your calendar around creating buffer space for thinking. I want to thank you for joining us today. Where can people find you real quick?
Absolutely. Onboardhealth.co is our website. Find me on Twitter as Mind of André. And those are the spaces where we're showing up. And Onboard Health, also on Twitter as Onboard Health, ONBOARD Health.
Thanks for joining us, good brother.
Thank you so much, y'all.
Candidates today, Julie, want to work for inclusive companies and are more selective in deciding where to work. With technology designed to avoid unconscious bias and hire qualified, underrepresented talent, TalVista helps you offer a fair, standardized, and equitable experience.
And Torin, we know that inclusive language in job descriptions helps attract a broader pool of talent. Redacted resume screening gives all candidates a better chance. And structured interviews enable mindful interviewing with objective scoring.
I love that, Julie. TalVista is your guide to conscious inclusion. Learn more at talvista.com/pod. That's talvista.com/pod. Awesome. And our Her Voice segment this week, where we amplify women making moves, is sponsored by TalVista, seeing beyond the obvious. First and foremost, Rushika Tulsian, dropping inclusion on purpose, an intersectional approach to creating a culture of belonging at work. It hits bookstores on March 1st. You can hit her up on Twitter at rtulsyan, RTULSHYAN. Knock this out.
I'm going to apologize in advance to Sage Kiloani Kwamano, a 27-year-old native Hawaiian woman from the island of Oahu and co-founder of Future for Us, a company dedicated to accelerating the advancement of women of color at work. She is a fierce pay equity advocate, diversity, equity, and inclusion champion, and an adventure capitalist. She is going to moderate a panel at South by Southwest on March 14th.
And the good part about it is that we have transcription services. So even though we may not say the person's name correctly, we will make sure that it is presented correctly down in our show notes. Shout out to having transcription services. I also shout out to Carrie Champion and Jamel Hill, who are joining CNN Plus, a streaming service that will co-host, where they will co-host a weekly program that will cover sports, culture, entertainment, and politics. Any name drops?
So just to the Pardox and Olivia team for welcoming us to Scottsdale this week, and making our first Chad Cheese and crazy work trip of 22 really one to beat.
Got it. And I close reminding each and every one of you to share the pod with your digital tribe. Do everything that you can to find your voice, like build better cultures, build better teams, build better workplaces, build better workplaces, build better workplaces. For now, Jay and I are ghosts.
See ya.
Everything is changing fast in talent acquisition, and keeping yourself up to date with the latest thinking, technology, and best practice is a challenge in itself. I'm Matt Alder, host of the Recruiting Future podcast, the show that gives you weekly insights, inspiring stories, and cutting-edge thinking from practitioners who are at the front line of talent acquisition. Recruiting Future is available wherever you listen to your podcasts.